Corinne Schaefer, and welcome to Create Outside the Box. In this episode, I will be speaking with artist and the gallery owner of Galerie Lucida, Michael Mazzeo, about his journey from photographer to gallerist, his role as an educator, and how he's bringing the New York art scene to the Jersey Shore. If you're interested in watching our conversation, please visit the Creative Operations YouTube channel under the playlist, Create Outside the Box. Michael Paris Mazzeo is an artist, educator, and gallerist living and working in Red Bank, New Jersey. Born and raised in Hoboken and trained as a photographer, he opened his first studio in New York City in 1990, where he photographed advertising campaigns for clients such as American Express, Major League Baseball, Guinness, Bass Ale, and Verizon. His editorial work has been published in a wide range of magazines, including Esquire, Men's Health, Glamour, and Latina. Seduced by the excitement of the art world, Michael opened his first gallery in Chelsea in 2005, where he helped advance the career of many emerging artists, awarding 15 with their first New York City solo exhibitions and exhibiting the work of more than 130 others in group shows. The gallery is noted for having produced critically recognized exhibitions, publications, and events, and for placing artists' work in prominent museums and private collections, including those of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Michael's commitment to art and education is evidenced by his long and diverse teaching practice, having served on the faculties of Parsons School for Design, the School of Visual Arts, the Pennsylvania College of Art and Design, New Jersey City University, the International Center of Photography, and currently the City University of New York. He's been a featured portfolio reviewer at art festivals and conferences, including PhotoFest, Photo Lucida, ASMP, and the Society for Photographic Education. Personal inquiry and an interest in research eventually landed him at the City College of New York, where he studied performance, video, and installation art, earning a Master of Fine Arts degree in digital and interdisciplinary art practice in 2015. Michael's desire to expand upon the already vibrant art offerings of the Jersey Shore led to his recent opening of Galerie Lucida, a contemporary art gallery in Red Bank, where he continues his support of emerging and mid-career artists through a program of exhibitions, events, artist talks, and workshops. So hello, Michael, and welcome to Create Outside the Box.
Hello, Corinne. So good to speak with you.
I'm excited about this interview and to learn more about you and your artistic journey, but I was thinking about how we met, and I think it was at a drawing class that Asya Jung was teaching, correct?
Oh, was that it? That's right. Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yes, at the Guild in Shrewsbury. And I was thinking we need to have like a podcast collection of all of the artists that I've met through Asya, because she's such a connector of
she
people.
Is. I haven't seen her though in probably 6 months or more. I don't know where she's kind of disappeared.
Yeah, she's a busy woman in demand. But we met originally at her drawing class at the Guild. And most recently, you and Galerie Lucida were small business supporters of Feed the Soul. So I want to give a shout out for your support of that very important initiative. So thank you.
I missed the event.
Well, you know what? We're making it an annual event.
Good.
Yeah, so there'll be more Feed the Souls, thankfully, and excited to continue with that initiative. But enough about that. Just wanted to give some background. But to jump into your story. So you grew up in Hoboken, and I was curious how that influenced you to become a photographer.
Yeah, I never thought about that before until I read your preview questions, and it's like, wow. Well, my first thought was it didn't influence me at all becoming a photographer. Growing up in Hoboken was I had a very unstructured childhood, I guess. My mother was a single mom for most of my childhood, and I grew up in the projects of Hoboken, and it was it's 1960s. Things were okay from our perspective as kids. The world was in kind of chaos, but we didn't know. It was a very integrated community where I lived. The projects were, well, I guess we were all kind of in the lower middle class, you'd call it. And my friends were of every persuasion, and everybody got along. Across the street from my building was our playground, which was an asphalt lot, and behind my building, out my bedroom window, were railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill to Jersey City. So I know this is getting off track, but freight trains. I start thinking now, yeah, freight trains all my life, freight trains. And I find that sound very soothing. And then every once in a while, or maybe once a year, the Ringling Brothers train would come past with all the animals in it, going to Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
And that was like kind of insane. It was so much fun. And why I bring that up is because thinking about photography, yeah, some of the first photographs I ever took were at that circus, at the Ringling Brothers Circus. Photography as a kid, and when I grew up, of course, it wasn't like now. We didn't have cameras in our pockets, and you didn't have a camera. Forget about going out and buying film and having it to pay for it to be processed. So photography wasn't something I really thought about. The next one I remember is the World's Fair, the 64 World's Fair. I still have pictures from that too. Not much, but it's fun to think about those things again. But basically growing up in Hoboken, it was just outside all the time. We were never in the house, always kicked out of the house, and always playing in the streets. We played in a junkyard down the street from us. Played in all the burnt out cars and everything, and we played baseball in sandlot baseball. We looked for an empty lot and find it, and you play ball there. And that's what it was like growing up there. Yeah, not much in the artistic realm, except I shouldn't say that. My father, who was presented as my father at the time, which is another long story and family story. It's really complicated. A lot of secrecy and lies and stuff. He was a painter though, and he was a longshoreman.
Okay.
And but he was a very good painter and a playwright. He did all these things as a longshoreman, which is really unusual, you have to think of it. But he and my mother got divorced when I don't even remember. I was young. So I only saw him on the weekends, and my brother paints, but I never got into that with him. So that's the beginnings of my art. Oh yeah. And yes, the most important influence in art to me was Catholic school.
Really?
Which was a total disaster for my entire life. But that's when I started to, I was always the one picked to decorate the billboards and hallways and stuff like that. So I'd be cutting out letters from construction paper and pinning up, pictures of Jesus here and there and crosses and stuff like that. And it was pretty fun, actually. And, I got confident that I could do things like that. So I was kind of an artist in elementary school, but not photography at all. And then I didn't think about it again until late in high school and beginning of college, where I picked up camera.
So what was your introduction to photography that made you want to pick up that camera?
Just looking at photographs. And I, like a lot of photographers who grew up in my generation, you were influenced by art photography was just coming into its own in the 60s and 70s, honestly. And what we were exposed to was, the modernist photography tradition, from I guess it's mainly 20th century photography. And a lot of that's very traditional, very I shouldn't say process oriented, but medium oriented, very medium specific. And to me, that was the fun of it. It was the challenge. And I actually started doing that. Now I remember we moved from Hoboken to Maywood, New Jersey when my mother remarried. to the man who turns out is my biological father when I was in my teens, but they would never speak of it. They never told me that. I figured it out through figuring it out, asking relatives and squeezing people for information. But there was a bathroom downstairs that I was able to fit a little tiny enlarger into, and I was able to develop film down there. And I started doing that. And the goal really for me at that point was to try to mimic, these great black and white photographers. And that's what I started to do. And I got pretty good at all that darkroom work. I took a couple of classes, photography classes in college, which really did nothing but discourage me. And then after college, I decided to take some classes at the New School. And there I met some great teachers, George Tice being a great photographer of New Jersey. He was one. And then another guy named Todd Bryant, who is, he did a lot of work, but he was really good at the business of photography. And that's what I think he wrote a book about the business of photography. But anyway, in these classes, these couple of classes I had, Todd actually asked me if I could assist for him. And I had no idea what that meant. He asked me to be an assistant for a day. He had a job coming up. I had no idea what that was. So I just said yes. Didn't ask to get paid or anything. I have no idea if I even got paid for that. And what my job was, but his job was to shoot a head of lettuce. Oh. And why didn't you need an assistant for that, right? Well, I learned quickly about advertising, photography, and what goes on and how it's all done. And my job for that day really was running around in the rain, finding heads of lettuce and toothpicks, because we just went through all these heads of lettuce to pick out the best leaves and pin them all together with toothpicks to make a pretty head of lettuce. Which nowadays would be done absolutely differently. But, back then, there weren't the gourmet groceries on every corner that had, big lettuce in plastic containers. It was just piled up into some cardboard box. Yeah. Nowadays, you get a stylist who would go out and come back with a couple of crates of beautiful lettuces, and they would put it together. And from there, I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. I want to be commercial. I want to be a commercial photographer. I want to go into advertising photography. And I started to look around for jobs. And I got a job with a corporate photographer. And again, it's something I knew nothing about. And I think I got paid $125 a week full time. What's it come out to? $3 an hour or something?
Oh my God.
Yeah. And that was oh yeah, that was tough. I had to live in New Jersey. I moved back into my parents' house and took a bus into the city every day. So I was working like 12-hour days for $125 a week. But it was great. Unfortunately, he didn't have much work. Mm-hmm. I guess, which is why he couldn't find assistants. He was willing to take me on. But he did get occasional jobs, which was really interesting. We had some fascinating experiences. He landed a annual report, which nowadays annual reports kind of non-existent for photographers. But back then there was money, corporate money for that. And this one was for Lockheed. Mm. And we traveled around the country, and I got to stand in one of the cones at the base of the Challenger space shuttle, which is gone. It was up on, raised up, and people were adhering the heat tiles to the base of the bottom of it. And I thought, wow, this is really weird, because I remember them always having problems with that. Usually, the heat tiles fell off or something. And I remember the guys who were doing it were like guys like me, right, mop-haired looking, wearing T-shirts, and they're under there just gluing these tiles in. Of course, they knew what they were doing. But being in space shuttle, and then going to the top of the what was the Saturn, originally the Saturn building. Okay. It's called the Vehicle Assembly Building now, I think, and which is one of the biggest structures in the country. And taking an elevator to the top and looking down at the top, from the top of the solid rocket booster, which was, just enormous, 20 stories high or something ridiculous. And we went into a clean room at another NASA location, and they were working on the Hubble telescope.
This is crazy.
So we were sent into a clean room where they vacuumed us inside out and took all our cameras and went in with Q-tips to clean everything out of it. And they said, well, we have to do this because, you know, if a speck of dust lands on that mirror, we might think it's a galaxy. But it was a great experience, and I really loved those jobs. Unfortunately, they were few and far between, and then I shortly left for a studio that was doing heavy-duty advertising and worked there for a few years.
Now, I'm curious. It sounds like, I mean, were you drawn to commercial photography, or was it really because of this teacher and mentor that you kind of stumbled into it, and then it was like, well, these projects are interesting. I like the challenge.
I can't even say I had a mentor back then. It was like going from one short thing to another. And it's just that, you know, I was exposed to something and then went with it and tried to make the best of it. You know, I was naive, very naive too at the time. And I was 27. I wasn't a kid. I was doing this for $125 a week. So that was, I had been worked after college. I'd been a bartender. And that led me down, you know, the wrong roads. And photography kind of brought me back. So for a while.
Yeah, but at some point, I mean, it started off, you know, $125 a week and project to project, and then you got this other job. But at some point, you got to a point where you were booking, you know, large companies. I mean, you have American Express, you have, what else do we have here? League Baseball, Verizon. I mean, what?
Yeah, they go on and on. Yeah, they're just names. They're just corporate names. You know, there were hundreds of jobs, but it started with that assistant job that I took the second time, where I went into the studio, Big City Productions. They had a few photographers, a great still life photographer who I worked with named Steve Bronstein, who was technically, you know, just brilliant. A really smart guy and a nice guy to work for. I worked for him for a few years and learned everything about studio photography. I didn't learn anything after him. He knew everything. Well, no, I shouldn't say it. There was another guy, LaMonica. That was his first name. He was another interesting guy, brilliant photographer. Technically, I learned a lot from those guys. And once you have the foundation, you can go out and do, you know, start building a portfolio, making your own stuff. And what I really learned was quality, you know, really what makes really good photography, not just good photography, but like really good photography. And for advertising, that's really important because they are really fussy. You know, those are days when they didn't have digital retouching. You did everything in camera, everything.
Because you were mentioning, again, you know, with the lettuce, you had to construct the perfect lettuce. You didn't have all of the retouching, so you had to create that. I mean, are those tools, even though we have, you know, technology now that in some ways simplifies things, we have food stylists or stylists that come in and create something and the photographer comes in, but because you have this like groundwork from before all of these advances, does that give you an advantage, you think, as a photographer? Because you can go old school or new tech?
I guess so. There isn't much call for old school photography anymore. But, you know, I shouldn't say that because at one point I stopped and went back 150 years to tintype wet plate collodion photography, which I started doing around 2000, 2003, which I went up to Rochester and learned it from Mark Osterman, and Mark and Franz Osterman, actually. Mark is he was the process historian at the Eastman House. And it was just the beginning. Well, nobody was really doing this process except Civil War photographers. And I learned it, actually. I learned the process from a Civil War photographer. I had this guy build me a camera. He gave me a quick lesson in how to mix the chemistry. Really, like, just do this and this and this. Didn't care about it. Once I got up to Rochester, Mark Osterman is, you know, the professor. Everything is done by the book and historically accurate. And so I learned a lot more. But I started doing that, and before long, you know, I was doing work with that and teaching it also. And now a lot of people have taken up tintype photography. It's become a lot easier now. Now you can buy the chemicals already mixed. But part of the fascination for me was after doing 20 years of still life and portrait lifestyle photography and having to be so pure and meticulous with it, that this was something I can go back to and get my hands dirty and make all kinds of mistakes. And, you can't perfect it. It's it's possible, but, you don't care about that.
Yeah.
And that eventually drove me out of commercial photography.
In your journey in commercial photography, when in that journey did you open your studio in New York? Because you opened your first studio in New York in 1990. Where were you?
Around then.
Around
more
then?
like 88 originally. I think I remember filing paperwork with the city of New York in like 1988. But, I was sharing a studio. I've always shared studios, by the way, and still assisting because you couldn't make a living as a photographer just from starting out. But it didn't take long because there was a lot of work. There were a lot of magazines and a lot of print advertising. There was no internet.
Yeah.
So everything, they needed photographers for everything. And there was work to be had, and you can find it. You just had to put a good portfolio together. You could get in to see art directors at advertising agencies. You'd call, somebody would see you. Magazine publications, all the big publications had days where you could drop off your portfolio, drop it off at Wednesday before 10, pick it up on Thursday afternoon. No problem. You might even get a letter back from somebody, or they'd call you with a job.
Yeah.
It was really a great time. It was a great time, but it was the tail end of the advertising industry, photography advertising industry. And I was told that even by a photographer whose studio I moved into in Soho in the early 90s, a guy named Barry O'Rourke, who had a long career as a photographer. But when I moved into his studio, he wasn't working at all. And he was telling me, this is it. This is the tail end. There's not the money in it anymore. And so I'm talking about 1990s, and he was telling me about the 1960s and how the fees that photographers were getting now, the 90s, are the same as they were in the 1960s.
Whoa.
Plus, in the 60s, they weren't checking your expenses. There was just money for it.
Wow.
And but it got to the point where everything was just so controlled, and penny pinching. It just got really difficult.
Well, it constricts the creativity when it's so restricted like that.
Yeah, and then when digital imaging came in and started to encroach upon everything, a lot of photographers started dropping out of the business because it became very difficult for them. I stayed for a while. I didn't drop out because of digital, because I ended up doing that as well, working digitally, but it wasn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
And there wasn't freedom. There wasn't creative freedom.
Yeah, there wasn't creative freedom. You spoke about the fact that you were doing commercial photography, then you added editorial photography into your wheelhouse. You've worked for magazines like Esquire and Glamour.
Yeah. Sure.
I'm just wondering, how you moved over to include that, and what some of the differences would be between say, a commercial shoot where, you're photographing, again, the lettuce, and something that's a portrait or a layout for a magazine. What are the differences and what are the challenges between the two forms?
Well, getting work, editorial and advertising work, I was doing that at the same time. It's easy to do. Editorial work is generally easier to get than advertising. The difference is the budgets, the money, and the control. Really, that's about it. You have a lot more freedom with editorial. There weren't as many eyes looking over you. Editorial was always fun, no matter what it was. Little still life things, which I did. Believe me, I did a lot of those. Still life shoots, product shoots, where you'd have to shoot 50 items for some special issue of a magazine, that, a gift issue or something like that. But then there was always something like New York Magazine, who had their weekly Best Buys section or something. And they were fun because they'd send you they'd say, oh, here, shoot this for us. And you could do whatever you want with it. That was fun. And that's what you always, of course, it didn't pay anything, very, very little. But that's what you wanted as a photographer, to let you do what you wanted to do, could do best, and show off. Advertising, there's just a lot of money, a lot of control. In time, over the years, a lot of that control was taken from the art directors, which is unfortunate. Art directors would be sent to the studio, they'd watch over the shoot, and clients would show up, their clients would show up to check things out and look at Polaroids and stuff like that. But in time, they started, the advertising agency's clients started demanding more control, creative control. which to me was a disaster. They didn't know what they were talking about. And, and the art directors sometimes were almost like cowering because they too were afraid of losing their account or losing their jobs. I kind of soured, as you can tell, I kind of soured on advertising. I worked with some great people, some great designers, and, had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, it's funny when you're talking about fear, because I've talked to a lot of artists and performers about this. I don't think any good decisions come out of fear, definitely not good art. So if you're, because it closes you up, how can you create something, that's going to be expressive or even compelling? I mean, even for an advertisement, if everybody's just reacting from this space of fear and trying to make everyone happy.
Yeah, it depends on what the fear, what kind of fear. If it's your own fear of something that's quite different than that fear of overlooking everything. Yeah, absolutely. But the advertising jobs, the big ones. I'm not talking about just little like the heads of lettuce or anything. I'm talking about the big advertising jobs. They were stressful. But really so enjoyable because, you see a photographer, you don't think when you look at an advertisement that it's not just a photographer doing it, of course. It's a team that produces these things. Even editorial, magazine images, they always feature the photographer and the model, of course, but it's the behind the scenes people that make the shots, really. They really do. You've got hairstylists, makeup artists. Sometimes it's the same person, but depending on the quality of the ad, it's two people, one for hair or one for makeup. Mm-hmm. You've got wardrobe stylist and sometimes an additional prompt stylist. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing food, you've got food stylists with plenty of assistants, and you have to bring in a kitchen if you don't have it. You got to bring in, rent freezers and refrigerators and stuff for those shoots. Stoves sometimes, or rent a studio that has all that stuff. But working with the teams, some of my best work was done. Some of my best images were made by makeup artists and hairstylists and prop stylists, without doubt. I could light the shot, but without them, there's no photograph there.
It's a collaborative effort, and good art is always a effort. Always.
Yeah, always. It always is.
Now you've shot a lot of still life. Do you prefer that to live models, or do you like a mixture of both?
Well, I'm not doing that, of course, now. I'm not doing advertising photography anymore, but I liked still life. What I liked about it was that, I'm really particular with things, and I could fuss with stuff all night long if I wanted to. The next day, if I wanted to. Still life, unless you're doing food, it doesn't move.
Yeah.
It's there. You can set your lights up. It's there. You can sleep on it and think about it and go back and look at film and do it again and again. With people, you can't. You have to make quicker decisions. Mm-hmm. But the shoots with people, I liked having people around and doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That was a lot more fun for me. Portraits and lifestyle stuff. Location work, going out somewhere and hauling gear in a truck and setting up lights outside of some random home or something to light it at night to make it look like it's daylight, and ridiculous stuff we did. Oh my God. Yeah, funny. I shot a catalog, a women's wear catalog in Lake Tahoe in the dead of winter. And it was, 9 degrees in the morning when we went out to shoot. It was just ridiculous.
Oh my gosh.
But, we had fun. It was always fun. But those were always fun shoots to get out and travel and do things.
Yeah. But it sounds like ultimately just this lack of creativity and the fact that there was so much control over everything, and it just wasn't fulfilling you anymore. Is that part of what made you kind of switch gears and gallerist?
Yeah, absolutely. I just got tired of doing that. And the other thing was it got to the point where the advertising agencies and everybody was so money conscious that they would just triple bid everything, even if they knew who they were going to shoot with already, which was really infuriating when you get a call to estimate a job and you knew you weren't going to get it.
Yeah.
But you had to do the estimate. Otherwise, they'd never call you again. And sometimes estimates take research. They take a lot of work to do, especially if you're doing a location shoot and have to hire a lot of people or props and things like that. You've got to have numbers that are pretty accurate. but the triple bidding on everything was really just time consuming and tedious, and I'm sick of it.
Was part of wanting to open a gallery to create the environment you didn't have as a photographer?
The gallery was started purely out of naivete.
Okay.
Well, not purely. I'd always shared a studio. And in Chelsea, when I was in Chelsea, in, I guess, when was it? I'm really bad at time and dates. Anyway, early on, before the galleries had moved in, there were a couple of galleries in Chelsea, but I had a studio there. Space was cheap. The landlord was great. I had a big space and had, at that time, I sublet to 3 other photographers who I all knew. I knew them all. I always knew the photographers that I shared space with, and we all worked together. On separate. We had separate businesses, but we all used the space as needed. And but throughout the years, no matter which space I was in, some photographer would drop out of the business because it was too hard, and they weren't making a living or something. And in Chelsea, the last studio space, 3 of them, 4 of them. 5 of them, maybe 5 photographers that I had in there, one after another, dropping out, and then I had to find somebody else to replace them. And at one point, there's nobody else to replace them. So I thought, well, there are galleries moving into this neighborhood. Let's try that. And I was still doing commercial work to pay the bills, of course. And I knew photographers, and I thought, yeah, I know photographers. That aren't advertising photographers, but they were journalists and photo essayists, great photographers, but not what the art world was looking for. And it took me a year or 2 to start learning what was going on, learning the business, and talking to other people who had galleries that were willing to talk to me. One who I still speak with regularly is John Lee from Bravin Lee Programs. He's a brilliant guy. He'd been in the business for a long time, knows everything and everybody, and is generous with information. He's been a great mentor, maybe I'd say. And I started to learn how to do it. And I focused on photography because that's what I knew. And then what happened was I started getting invited to photo festivals, and I was on the portfolio review circuit. So I'd be flown out to Houston for a couple of weeks, and in a ballroom in DoubleTree Hotel where there are 50 tables set up, and art directors and gallery owners and editorial, magazine art directors, book publishers, all sitting at a table, and photographers coming in 20 minutes at a time to sit with you. They'd make an appointment to speak with whoever they wanted to speak with. And photographers would get to see like five people a day to get their portfolio reviewed. And I started looking at photography in a totally different way, and seeing how photographers who are doing really their own thing were doing it and not making work to please people, which is what you do in advertising and editorial. You make work to please people, and it's got to look good to them. But I started seeing projects, right? Not in great individual photographs, but entire projects of things, and studies that people were doing, and experimental work, and I had a greater interest in that than almost all of the other reviewers. So I was able to pick a couple of photographers who were doing this work that at first glance is not commercially viable or too esoteric or something, and I'd be able to show them, and they'd get noticed in New York. They'd get first of all, they're getting a solo show in New York City, and sometimes getting pressed and getting sales, which was really good. So those portfolio reviews, were a great help to me for both learning and filling gallery. And I was doing portfolio reviews yesterday at the International Center of Photography. It was yesterday morning, and I'm doing it again tomorrow morning. And I found, I met with like 7, 8 artists, photographers, and I asked 3 or 4 to be in our photography show, which I'm doing in September. And I'll see more tomorrow and probably ask a couple more. So, but this gallery is very different than my past gallery. So the last gallery ended in 2012. I should have closed it much earlier because I ran it during the recession.
Yeah.
It was a disaster for me. Absolutely. But I kept it going out of ego and commitment to the artists. But it worked out for the artists. I've got them into museum collections and private collections, which was great. But I let it go on too long, and I had to scale down the size of the gallery a number of times, and then I had everything at the end. I had everything in storage, or most everything in storage, in the basement of my building in Chelsea, and then Hurricane Sandy hit and flooded Chelsea.
Oh God!
And I lost everything. And that was the end for me for a long time.
Yeah.
A couple of people still speak to me, but it's photography. Come on, print another picture. You got film. Unfortunately, some of the works were one of a kind, and my own personal collection that I bought from artists and stuff, it was all destroyed for the most part, all destroyed. But I missed it, and I went back to school after that in my mid-50s because I wanted to learn about art, which I never studied art. I knew photography and I knew art photography, but I didn't know anything really else about, I knew basic art history, that kind of stuff. But contemporary art, I didn't know. And I wanted to learn more about that. So I went back to school in a new program that was opened up at City College. And got my MFA there in digital and interdisciplinary arts practice. It's a mouthful of an MFA, I know. We call it DIAP for short, DIAP.
And why those two?
Arts practice.
Why those two? What drew you to those two?
To what two?
Digital?
Oh, it's all one thing. Digital and interdisciplinary arts practice was the title of the program.
Okay.
Because I knew nothing about it, and it was new things to learn. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this sounds exciting. There's digital, there's interdisciplinary, which, wow, what else can I do besides photography? Because I was kind of souring on photography also at the time. And it was a great time for me. It was tough, though. It was really hard because I was married with 2 kids and lived in, I was living in New Jersey and was commuting to school, and I was torn all over the place, and it really kind of threw a big wrench in my life and kind of screwed things up a bit. But we all make mistakes. But the program was good. I learned a lot.
And were you teaching at this time?
Oh, yeah, I was teaching too, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because you've taught at a lot of very prestigious.
I've been teaching since the mid-90s. Yeah, always as an adjunct. Mm-hmm. Getting my MFA, I thought after that I would want to get a full-time teaching position, but I had after I got out of school, there were a lot of family issues I had to deal with for a number of years, and put a lot of things aside. I kept teaching as an adjunct, but I never really got to a full-time position, which I'm kind of glad I didn't. It wouldn't suit me. The bureaucracy, again, I would be getting into, which I'm not good with that.
When you are teaching students and you have so much experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly with photography and with the industry, what are you hoping to impart to the students, and what do they give back to you as not only an artist, but as a gallerist? Like, do they kind of reinvigorate you sometimes with their, fresh perspective? What's the give and take in that relationship?
That depends. It depends what I'm teaching and where I'm teaching at the time. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm not getting much back because since the pandemic, I'm teaching online, and now I'm teaching digital imaging online, which is not. It's not a great way to teach, not great for the students. But what I enjoy is I'm exposing a lot of students who have no whatsoever experience in art, or digital imaging or design. And that's what I'm incorporating all those things into my projects. So I'm supposed to be teaching digital imaging, just teaching them how to use Adobe, Photoshop, and Illustrator. And I do that, but I bring in graphic design lessons, and I'll bring up art history, and little by little. And it is rewarding at the end of it's tough for the students working online like that. And some of my students, one of my students she have 4 kids and another one on the way. And she works I can't believe how she does. She works so hard. It's just remarkable. And you see them, just trying to advance themselves, their lives, their careers, and they're really heartening. It really is something. And then occasionally I have students in these programs who know it all already. What I'm teaching them is they learned in like high school, and they do things very differently. And I learn from them, which is nice. They're using different applications. They're showing me stuff like, how'd you do that? And they say, oh, yeah, this is a shortcut. I said, tell me, I don't know that one. So that's always fun.
And you've done, in addition to, like you said, you went back to school, you've done teaching, but you also branched out as an artist. You've done some performance art as well. I wanted to kind of get into like how you got into that and how you explored that.
That was all in my MFA program. I started doing, we had video classes, and I started doing that. We had programming class, which I really liked, and I wish I'd kept up with it. But the software changed so quickly that I wasn't able to keep up with it. I'd love to go back and return to it, because I was actually doing my most interesting work in that, and most playful work. But the performance stuff the performance work was fun. So I got to do video, a couple of different video pieces, and then I did the live performance for my thesis, which was a durational performance. It only lasted 7 hours, 7 or 8 hours. It could have gone on for a day, but I didn't have use of the building after that. I was given use of Shepherd Hall, which is this beautiful Gothic cathedral-like room. You probably saw a picture of it. I think I sent you a picture of the hall, and nobody had ever done a performance in there before, and they'd let me do it in there, but I only had from like morning until like 5 p.m. or something. And so I did my performance where I loaded up my body with coils of hemp rope, and proceeded to walk around the campus. It was hot too. The rope is heavy. You get into the heavy rope, and I'm talking about rope that's like that thick. They had to have it imported from Romania, by the way.
Wow.
The only place that I could find hemp rope. And I had to use hemp rope because all the rope here is jute, and it will tear your hands apart.
Yeah.
Hemp rope is nice. And they still make it traditional way there. I think I still have the contact of where to get it. I keep thinking, I want to do that again. I don't know. And I proceeded to walk around the campus and entered the hall, and dropped all the rope on the floor and unraveled it, stretched it all out, and began to knot it creating barrel knots, creating a rosary. We ended up making a rosary that spanned maybe 25 feet across. It was huge. Wow. So it was all due to research into, and this is all stuff that was brought out of my childhood and Catholic schools and myth and magic and mostly religion and faith. And again, I was doing a lot of research into that and reading up on different ritual. It was a big part of it, was ritual. And it's something I want to go back to. And I put it aside for right now, but I just had a couple of epiphanies this week about things as I was getting ready, prepared to speak to you. It's like, wow, how did I not think of that before? And one of your questions prompted me, I think. Mm-hmm. And I want to return to that faith-based ritual work in not just in performance. I don't know if I'll do performance again, but in other media, start tackling that again.
Yeah, because you had mentioned that you like very much to research when you're doing your projects. You like to kind of delve in. Can you kind of explain a little bit about how that with your artistic process?
Yeah, that's what I learned. in the MFA program. I'd never understood the importance of the background material to art. And I think it's really important. And it's been stressed a lot in the past, number of decades in art schools. But I think in general, a lot of artists don't really think about it. And like I said, I had to research ritual practices, different religions, I had to research my own family history, which I told you is some of it's still a mystery to me. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot to purge. Mm-hmm. I have a lot to purge, and that's what I'm going to work on. But that's the ritual, the research that I'm talking about. You've got to know, where work's coming from if you're making it. You can't just make pretty pictures. Mm-hmm. And that's something that really kind of infuriates me, is just looking at work that has no depth to it. Mm-hmm. Or work that just imitates other work. It's made to look like art. As a great phrase coined by the artist and critic, writer Walter Robinson, coined the phrase "zombie formalism" back in like 2013. And zombie formalism refers to art that is made specifically for sale by making it look like what people expect art to look like. Does that make sense?
It's superficial.
It's superficial, it's derivative, yeah, but it sells.
But it sells.
And it still does. And I see artists all the time, especially abstract work, where it is just repetitive and copying this and that. And it's really infuriating to me. And I want to know what's driving you're making abstract work. What's driving it? Where's it coming from? Why? Are you just fascinated with form and shape, or is there something deeper to it? And you can see even in abstract art, there's a lot to go deeper in. If you read Kandinsky or Hannah of Clint, there's gigantic paintings that were, initiated by spirituality. Mm-hmm. That were, she had a major show at the Guggenheim, the work that hadn't been seen really ever. But it's all spiritually driven, and there's reasons for all these markings. And even if you look at Paul Miro, there's you're just seeing these little shapes and things, and they look like just swatches on the canvas sometimes, but they represent something mm-hmm. to the artist, and it all comes from someplace. And I think that's really important. And I can't make anything, or I just won't show it if I'm making stuff that I look at later and go, what was he thinking?
Yeah,
caught in that trap. You don't want to get caught in that trap.
Yeah, what's the story? What is the story that I'm telling? And it's funny because art can be or is nourishment. Nourishment for the soul. And, just like with traditional food, you've got fast food. It's easy, it's cheap, it's consumable. People get it, but it's not the best for you. And then you've got a 7-course meal that's, crafted, the freshest ingredients, and that you can really enjoy. And there's unfortunately people that are going to grab fast food sometimes. And then it's kind of getting back to nutrition and showing people, the good ingredients and why they're worth so much.
And you, as an opera singer, mm-hmm. first of all, you have to have mastery, for no better term, I guess, mastery of the skills. You have to have mastery of the skills, right? You have mastery of your voice and control of your voice. And you have to understand the text as well as the music. And not just understand it being, much of it being foreign languages. You have to understand the story and everything, but you also have to understand the intent behind these stories, the meaning of them in context to their period, the time period. And your job is to invoke the zeitgeist and make it relevant today.
Yeah, no pressure.
And it's the same thing with visual art.
Yeah.
You're invoking the past. You've got to have a mastery of, in most visual art. You have to have a mastery of some techniques. But more importantly, I think, is concept. And, you've got to know what came before, absolutely, and why. And you've got to have a concept that relates to, or that is, again, kind of spurred by the zeitgeist. That's hard as hell to do. And in looking at art for this gallery, now I have not shown photography much. I'm looking at painting and sculpture and installations and textiles and all these different things and learning a lot as I do it, which is really the best part. And I'm showing work that fascinates me. Really, I look at it and it's like, yeah, that's what you're doing. I know that's what you're doing. This is great. Tell me more. And I want to know more. And I want to show it to people. I want other people to see it. And that's why I opened this space.
Yeah, so let's get into Galerie Lucida. I mentioned before, this is a very different gallery than the gallery that you had in Chelsea.
Night and day.
So
for a number of reasons.
Yeah, what are the differences? And again, it's a very different area. You're now in Red Bank, New Jersey. So what are the differences, and what are you hoping to bring to the Jersey Shore with this gallery?
Just due to the density alone of New York City, there are thousands and thousands of people with a deep interest in art. And they are surrounded with museums and galleries that can see it every day. We don't have that here.
No.
There's not that density of population. There aren't that many people who are exposed to art other than what they see in the local spaces. And a lot of the local spaces or co-op galleries, which are great for the local artists, and but they're not a hotbed of contemporary art by any means. And then there were the galleries or places that are named gallery, something and something gallery, that aren't galleries at all. They're just stores, painting stores for things to put on your walls. They do not do exhibitions. They do not try to expose you to anything. They do not try to teach you anything. They're not bringing anything to the community, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Now we have great institutions here. Count Basie Theater, Monmouth Arts Organization, terrific. The Monmouth Museum has its moments, and we've got Monmouth University also. But there's no commercial galleries. There are no commercial galleries, really. And the ones that I've seen in the region are more pop, more palatable art. And I'm trying to push things here a bit. And not saying that this is necessarily better in your opinion. In my opinion, yes, it might be. But it's something that you probably haven't seen, and I want you to see it. And see if it gets you excited, see if it incites you to ask questions, see if it makes you want to share it with someone else. And if you want to buy it, it's available too. Notice I don't talk much about the sales because, oh my God, it's secondary. I know I've got to make a living here somehow, and I've got to start broadening the range of things I have here for sale, other than just these great pieces of art. I want to start incorporating more programs. We're doing artist talk speech show, which is proving to be pretty popular because, again, people are getting to come in and ask questions of artists who they would never meet otherwise.
Right.
You go to an opening in New York, you're not going to get time to, they're so crowded, you're not going to have any kind of conversation with anybody. And I want to start doing some workshops and things here too. And I have some other ideas as well.
No, I think it's great. I mean, I kind of was opening my nonprofit creative operations in the same vein of, there is nothing in this area, that is classical music or opera related.
Right.
Anything with fine arts, it's like you're either going to New York or you're going to Philly. And I do think that there is an audience. They might not know who they are, but there is an audience that wants to do these things, wants to be exposed to these things, and doesn't want the costs of going into the city and going out to dinner, expensive tickets, expensive entry fees, but they still want these experiences. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that you don't dumb down your programs. I think as artists and performers, sometimes we discredit our audiences. We assume they're not going to get something. If something's good, people will get it. You have to be aware of your audience and how far to push them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, challenge them a little bit. They can take it,
Yeah.
especially if you're having things like artist talks and workshops where people can engage with the art and feel part of the art and actually meet with the artists and understand the stories behind it, make these personal connections with the art. So it's more than just something on a wall or something that you put on a table. And I love that you're doing that because, I've done that sometimes too, like with Feed the Soul. I had 25 minutes of classical and opera, and I was a little nervous about that big chunk of serious opera and classical. And, had a couple people go, "Ooh, okay, you sure you want to do this piece?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." No one said anything. Everyone enjoyed it. There was no talking. There was no, rustling around of boredom. At the end, they were just like, "Oh my gosh, this was like seeing Broadway."
Exactly. It was like seeing you at 3BR doing your Kurt Weill show in a place with, not great acoustics, concrete building, and everybody just listen to that voice. Oh my God.
Thank you.
We don't get that around, and you don't.
No, and you don't
it's
get
just
the fine
something
art.
new, something different. And it's like, have I been missing out on something for this long? Maybe I should explore it a little bit more.
Yeah, and also for younger people, if they're not exposed to it, they won't invest in it, or because they don't, like, what does it have to do with me? It's something in the city. If it's part of the community. And again, when you have these events and you have these talks where you're inviting, hey, we want you to be part of the conversation. How often has art asked people to be part of the conversation?
Yeah. Well, we're trying. I'm really kind of shocked that with all the schools around here, not just high schools, but Brookdale Community College, Monmouth University, all the art classes, a lot of art classes out there. Why haven't they sent their students here? I'm wondering, why is that? Am I not reaching out? Am I not reaching that group? And this is something I have to do. I've only been open for 6 months, and I got to tell you, it's a lot of work. I recently brought on an associate who's still just working part-time right now, but she's been a great help. And, thank you. Take over the social media. I don't want to be on Instagram. And we have a lot of outreach to do. And I feel I'm disappointed that I haven't reached that demographic yet. And this is something I have to do. Who I have reached is the artists, all the local artists in this area. They're happy to see the gallery here. They're a great means of support. They are out here for events. Have an opening. They're all here. It's great. Great people. I've met a lot of great artists also, and I'm slowly, incorporating some local work into the shows also. Where that was not my original goal. Was not. My goal still is not about showing local artists necessarily, unless they are, outstanding local artists. And there are outstanding local artists, but top it off with that, the conceptual part of it that has to be there too. I've got a couple of local artists in this show. The current show came about a little differently than how I started Gallery and how I'm continuing with it. This one's a little kind of an outlier. But I've got a couple of local artists in the next show, which is called Botanica. And it's botanicals. It's all botanicals. And when I give a topic, when I do a theme, it's broadly interpreted. It's not flowers.
Yeah.
Actually, there are a few flower paintings. It's installations, there's textiles, there's sculptures, abstract, a lot of abstract things. There's digital artworks, all kind of stuff. But it all has something to do with organic plant matter. Whether it's
Is that open?
That opens June 21st.
June 21st.
Yeah.
So that's good because it's coming out in June. So everyone listening, got to check it out.
And this show ends on June 1st with an artist talk. And we have 10 artists in the show. I think maybe 7 may show up for the artist talk, maybe more. I don't know. It's going to be a busy one.
Yeah.
Just hoping we'll see what happens. Will people come out on Saturday afternoon in June? I'm not sure. Depends on the weather, I think. But it'll be a really interesting talk. We got a couple of great artists, local artists. Kathleen Beausoleil, who's just terrific local scenes of gatherings. And whether they're on the beach or at the Fireman's Fair, or whether they're protest marches in the streets locally, she paints them, and exquisitely. And, what's the concept? Why not take a snapshot? Well, it's very personal to her, the gatherings themselves, because she's not comfortable with that. She's, internalizes. She is, she's not somebody who gets out in the crowds, but she observes them. And she's drawing upon art history as well. She was pointing out one of her paintings, how it's based on a Manet crowd scene. It's like, oh, really? And she told me how. It's like, damn, I had not picked up on that. And now I look at her work, in a very different way also. But I'm fascinated with her work. We might do a pop-up show at the end of the summer, of her work, because it's so important to this region.
Yeah.
And somebody actually pointed out, and somebody who bought one of the paintings said, this could only be, I'm buying this because it could only be made here, in this area, at this time. It's like, wow. He picked up on that. That's really impressive, an impressive feat for the artist, I have to say. Yeah.
And also, again, not to underestimate your audience, not to underestimate the people coming in, that they will get it. It sounds like what you're doing now is energizing you and inspiring you.
Yeah.
Do you know what exactly about it energizes you? Is it that, do you get excited about sharing all of these stories that these artists have to tell?
Learning stories, sharing the stories, learning about the work, the process, how it came about, the history of it, all that. I'm fascinated by all of it. Personal stories I would never imagine looking at a painting. There's one I'm going to have to buy one of the paintings out of this show because I just adore it, and it's just fascinating to me, and because I didn't really know why, and I still don't know why it appeals to me so much, but it has to do with caregiving, and it's a simple painting of a boy holding a sick alligator, and it's not highly realistic, it is gestural, and it's carefully drawn, but not realistic, like hyper realistically drawn at all. But it moves me, it really does. And then when I talked to the artist about, what the alligator, what's that? And he told me that, I don't want to talk about it right now. I don't know if he's really spoken about it in public.
Yeah,
but it's personal. It's a personal family story to him. And it has nothing to do with an alligator whatsoever. Yeah. It has to do with caregiving.
Yeah.
And that has been a big part of my recent years. Yeah.
So you connected on that.
Yeah. Plus, I'm talking about Brooks Frederick, who's a fascinating artist to me, and he's a real community activist. He's from New Orleans area, and a lot of his work shows that. And he actually has a TED Talk that he did. That's, oh my God, I just love this guy. He gives back to the community, does a lot of work for the community. And and for people in general. During the pandemic, I had these little portraits of his that I'd done, like 6 by 8 inches or so, and they're sketched and painted, and typical of him, he'll use whatever media he feels like. If he needs to paint it with acrylic or oil paint, he'll do that. If he needs to finish it off with a ballpoint pen, he'll do that. But these portraits, which are really nice and intimate portraits, I found out were, well, he calls them Zoom portraits, and they were done over Zoom.
Oh,
and they were
God.
done during the pandemic when he said artist models were out of work and they couldn't get work. Everybody was isolated. He thought, I can hire artists. I can hire artist models and have them pose, have them sit for me on the internet.
What a great idea.
Right? Yeah.
Wow.
And of course, I'm sure he's done other people, his friends and other people on Zoom, but he's got this whole series of Zoom portraits. And they're great. They're great. What I like about them is, portraiture in a gallery is always, portraiture for artists is always challenging because, who wants to live with a portrait of somebody that they don't know, right? Selling portraits, if it's a recognizable figure, a historical, a contemporary figure, a celebrity, those things will sell. People hang them up. But a portrait of an average person or one of your family members or something might not appeal to somebody who's looking to buy artwork, right? Or looking for artwork for their home. But his portraits are more archetypal than specific to a person. And that's, and when it comes to portrait painting, that's what I look for. So it's archetype. Something that has broad appeal, that has, underlying meaning and, reaches people on different levels. And that's what I see in a lot of Brooks's work.
You can see that you light up when you're talking about all of these artists and what they're bringing to the table and what they're sharing. And you're like a little art detective,
And what they're teaching me, what I'm learning from
them. What you're learning from them.
Big part of it.
The big part of it. And it's about community,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Big deal. Big time.
It's this shared experience through the art, through learning about their process, through learning about their stories. And then you're like the host introducing their stories and their work and their process to New Jersey and to the people that come into Galerie Lucida. And it's like, oh, you have to see this art. It's like meeting this person. You have to meet this person. They've got all of it to share with you.
Funny thing, do you know what the word lucida means?
I do not.
Well, if you look it up in the dictionary, lucida is the brightest star in a constellation. That's why I picked it.
So you are literally lit up like a bright star.
Not me necessarily, but I want the gallery to be the brightest star in this constellation of galleries around here. I want these artists to be the brightest stars that are seen around here. I want them to shine. So yeah, that's the lucida.
Really, really beautiful. So we know, okay, so we've got the botanical show that is in June. Can we have that date one more time for that opening?
Yeah, Botanica is the title of the show because I like to play around with words. That opens on June 21st. It's a Friday.
June 21st.
June 21st. Yeah. And that'll run through July, most of July.
And what's next, beyond that for the gallery, and what's next for you?
Beyond that, I might do a pop-up show at the end. We'll call it a pop-up show, maybe a short 2-week show at the end of the summer to feature some local work, primarily Kathleen's, if it's still available, and then I'd like to get some inexpensive, more gift-oriented artwork in here also, things that people can buy that's not going to break the bank and can, gift to people. Or I have to figure out how that's going to work yet. I'm not quite sure. I'd like to get, see who's making books around, who's making artist books.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything. Who's making, prints.
I
haven't seen a lot of that stuff.
And And what about for you as an artist? Are there things that you have planned for you?
Yeah, what about me? I've got notebooks filled with stuff. Like I said, I have a lot to purge, and I need to take time with it. I did a series of the last body of work I posted on. I have a website up that I built last year. I haven't touched it since, and I posted, maybe a handful of images, maybe 10 or 12, 15 images of a recent project that I did, and I think that project's done for now, and that came from a lot of research again into family and faith, and it is a lot of faith-based, or lack of faith. We're looking for faith. It's something that I've been thinking about a long time, and that body of work came, and I'm talking about the body of work. It's called Providence. It started when I was on the road driving, and as a caregiver, and looking after we're having to take frequent trips, road trips to North Carolina on like spur of the moment. And, shoot down there, drive down there, stay the night, drive back, or stay a couple of days, drive back. A month later or 3 weeks later, I have to do it again, just, emergency calls that I've been getting. And I decided, you know what, let me take a camera with me. I know I don't have time to go out and shoot anything, but I started shooting out the window of the car while I was driving, through the windows, really, and focusing on landscape and not looking through the camera. Mm-hmm. But after a number of, tests, I know what I'm doing with the camera. I know how to aim it, point it. I don't have to look through it to get somewhere near what I want, and how to set the settings properly. And I started doing these multiple exposure images, one on top of another in the camera. If it was film, it would be one piece of film photographed 10 times or so on the same piece of film.
Yeah.
But I'm using a digital camera, same thing. On one frame, it's taking 10 images. And I'm shooting through the window, and 10 images, nothing's staying still. I'm not photographing the same place 10 times. So what would happen is I've got this overlapping in a frame. I've got this overlap of 10 images that are really different locations. They could be certainly a mile apart, or across a series of a mile or two. And I did a lot of that, and didn't know what to do with it. I knew I needed to do it just to be thinking and shooting and looking at something. Mm-hmm. And then after a while, I pulled them out and made little prints of them, like 4x6 prints of all of them, and started to think about them. And I knew that what I was looking for was, it all came from that lack or loss of faith, and thinking about faith through the lens of the sublime. Right. So think about like Edmund Burke, and here we go back to research and philosophy again. But the sublime was a big romantic notion, and a lot of it had to do with landscape art, and extravagant skies and heavens and things like that. But and I was thinking about the sublime and the sublimity of it also. How I'm not looking to make grandeur, these grand photographs, which you want to see photographs of grand landscape, go to Instagram. Yeah. There are thousands of photographers doing that, going to the tops of mountains and skydiving and taking these amazing landscape. That's not my interest. I just wanted to do something. I had to, reach inside and put something out there that came from here. And I started doing this, and I started looking at the images, and as I started looking at them, I had hundreds of these pictures, and some of it was just garbage. But then I started to think about putting them together and piecing them together into diptychs and triptychs and polyptychs, and creating these landscapes that actually looked like they could be real landscapes. Mm-hmm. But not only was each individual image made up of 10 frames from different locations, the images that make up the triptych or diptych could be hundreds of miles apart, months apart, in time. But you would never know because they flow together and look almost like a continuous landscape. And they're very mysterious. The light source is hard to define because of the technique. There's very little control I have over it. Quite often I was shooting directly into the sun through the trees purposely to create, this illusion of what's beyond. What's beyond the landscape is what I want to get at. And that's what it became. So what is there? How can I get through this maze of overlapping vegetation and things and foggy looking? And there are light sources somewhere. What's that from? And some of them are just glowing light sources, but in some of the images, they're very specific. You might almost think that there were fires or aliens or something landing, that kind of thing. And it was really, and there's only a couple of images in that whole series that are not made that way as multiples. They're all multiple images except for, not multiple, they're all multiple images on each frame, but they're not all diptychs or triptychs.
Yeah.
There's a couple of single images, but there's only one, I think, in that whole group that is a straight photograph with that, one frame. And that is one where I was looking up at the sky and I took it with my iPhone because the clouds were in the shape, the opening was like the shape of a cross.
Wow.
And the birds were just in it. And I have it on the website, on my website, my personal website. But I'm still playing around with that image itself. Yeah. I'm inverting it and looking at it in negative. I'm printing it in different process. I'm trying it in cyanotype and stuff. I'm just seeing what that sparks, if it sparks anything. But I'm going back, definitely going back to that idea of faith and family, because I've learned a lot about family recently that I didn't know. It's like, oh God, more. Explains a lot though, and redeems a couple of characters.
It's so interesting. You felt compelled to take these pictures and to play. It was like, I'm going to take these pictures. I don't know if it's going to actually be anything. I'm going to just see what happens. But what interested me in the story is you were in these landscapes. What's beyond? What is beyond? And did you know as you were taking the pictures, like, was part of it like, what's at the end of the journey? What's at the end of this process? Was that subconscious?
Well, I was dealing with bad situations with family members. I'm talking like addiction stuff. So I don't know what I was thinking. It didn't start, the photographs didn't start as play at all. That was just an urge. I had to do it. And I think looking back, that year or so of shooting, I can't get my arm out of this and raise it up. But that year of holding a camera that's probably 5 pounds out like this for hours and hours, working it and trying to manage it. I think that led to the shoulder surgery.
Oh, gee. Okay.
Yeah, because it was after that I started, oh my God, what do I do?
Yeah.
I won't go back to that. I'll work a different way. I don't even know if I'm going to work with photography. There's a lot of other things I want to do.
There's a lot to explore and to
There's a lot to explore. There's a lot to explore.
Discover. It all sounds really fascinating. If people want to learn more about you as an artist and learn more about Galerie Lucida, where should they look? Like what, your websites, your social media, all of that. And I'll include that in the show notes.
Yeah, my website is michaelmazzeo.com. Like I said, I put a project up there, and then I put some older photographs, portraiture up there that I did. I don't know why. I'll take that down probably. More of a placeholder. I don't even have a bio up there yet. And I put, why? Because of this. I underestimated the time I'd be putting into this gallery. So yeah, I do need to really go back and update my personal life, or get a personal life actually. Uh, and the gallery you can of course find at galerielucida.com, and gallery is spelled the French way, Galerie. Lucida is Lucida. Why did I spell gallery Galerie? Graphically, it worked better, and it flows better saying Galerie Lucida than Lucida Gallery, which is the American way to do it. Gallery's always at the end, basically. Lucida Gallery didn't sound right. Galerie Lucida sounded great. And visually, when I created the logo, the identity, it fit together really nicely and looked so much nicer as in French than in English. It's just now I have to tell everybody how to spell it.
Okay, we'll have everything in the show notes, including the Instagram account.
Oh yeah, there's Instagrams. There's all kinds of stuff.
There's all kinds of stuff. And again, it makes it unique. I don't have any problem with unique. Yeah, you have to spell it. I have a unique name. I'm always having to spell it for people and whatnot, but it makes it stand out. And your gallery definitely does stand out. And I just thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. And I really appreciate you sharing all.
It was delightful.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Create Outside the Box. Please subscribe, rate, and share our podcast. You can listen to Create Outside the Box on Spotify, Buzzsprout, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Check us out on our Creative Operations YouTube channel, where you can subscribe to watch our interviews. You can find and follow Creative Operations on our Facebook page and on Instagram at @CO_Creative Operations. For more information about Creative Operations, please visit www.creative-operations.org.